Recording. Okay, it's on.
Yay. So welcome everybody. My name is Debbie Rosen and I am so excited to have our first time guest, Melinda Wenner Moyer. And I'm going to be introducing her, and I thought that what I would do is share a little bit about Study Pro. If you are new to Study Pro, I know we have a lot of folks here that have been coming for quite some time. And as I was saying, if you just logged on, we really appreciate that. We love this community. I recognize almost all of the names on here. And so I really appreciate you all being here and the fact that we can continue to share. Next month, we have another new and special guest who specializes in raising teens, which is always a challenging job. But I will just tell a little bit of story about how I met Melinda. I had, I guess, read one of her articles in the New York Times, The Discipline Looks Different in a Pandemic. And then I was like, wow, I really need to start reading more and more. And what I realized about Melinda, and I'll give her a little bit more of an official introduction, was that she really sits in the intersection of her science, training and background, and parenting. And I thought that was really so interesting to see that when there's a parenting issue, one of the ways that we can feel more confident about, about what kinds of ideas and advice that we're given is when someone really digs into the science behind it. And that's, of course, what Melinda's going to share a little bit today. And that's really what she does, is find that, science-based approaches, which I find to be super interesting. So she is a science journalist and is a contributing editor at Scientific American. She also writes for the New York Times, Washington Post, Slate, and a whole bunch of other nationally known publications. She's also on the faculty at New York University, and she teaches science journalism. I wish I was in that class with her. That I thought it would be fascinating. And as we were chatting about the first-time author of a book, which I think will unite us all, because it's called How to Raise Kids That Aren't Assholes. So sorry for that little word right there the first thing in the morning, but of course we all want to do that. And we're excited to see that. And most importantly, I think, of course, is that she's a wife and mother of 2 children, so has a lot of experience in what she's writing about, and has a newsletter that she'll share at the end of the presentation. So she'll talk a little bit more about herself, but as you can imagine, we're super excited to have her here today. And one of the things that we really collectively, as Melinda and I talked a lot about, what do we talk about, is, this idea that, interestingly enough, there is a silver lining in all of this COVID stuff. And that's that we probably slowly but surely started building some resilience and realizing not only for ourselves, but our families, that we can get through this, and there are strategies. And we've all had to be much more creative and much more persistent and much more optimistic, and maybe a lot of other things. Or maybe you're looking for ways to be a little bit more like that. And that's why we're all here today. So I have found that, I know we've all found in talking to circles of people, that we have found some things in ourselves that maybe we didn't know existed. So Melinda will share how to hold on to those for perpetuity, I think, as we go through the presentation. So if you want to go to the next slide, for those of you who are not familiar at all with the Study Pro, we are an executive function and study skills center. And of course, during COVID and all times, kids struggle with what we call the process of school. So the content being math, science, history, etc., and the process being, do I know about my math? Do I know that I have a history test coming up? How do I break down this work? How do we get started? And so again, whether it's online or in person, these are skills that may not be developed yet. And we really do look at this as a set of skills that we can help students to bolster if they are struggling with it. We talk a lot, if you did not watch the presentation we did last month, how to be your child's executive function cheerleader, we really encourage you to watch that on our website under events. It really does talk a lot about what executive functions are and how we as parents can most appropriately support our students, knowing that they may just be missing skills, and it's not that they are any of those words we don't like, which is not motivated or lazy. So the next slide, we'll just talk for a second about what we do. So we do have some classes that are coming up starting February 14th for our study skills courses, and those are on Sundays. And we, of course, do coaching and remote homework center to support actually getting the work done, and then writing coaching. So with that, the main event, what you're here for and what I'm here for, I'm going to go ahead and put myself on mute after I introduce you. So please take it away. Melinda, we're excited to hear what you have to share.
All right. Thank you so much, Debbie. I'm very excited to be here. It's an honor.
And I'll just add really quickly, I'm so sorry that if you guys have questions, I'm going to be monitoring the chat. And so I just wanted to let everybody know that Melinda had graciously offered to take questions in between if we find them, if there's a way to kind of interject, and that we will be sharing the slides, or the recording, I should say, afterwards, and if that's okay. So I think there's one request. Could she speak up a bit, please? I don't know if there's a way to turn your volume up, but I will once again turn it over to you.
All right. I'm going to speak up. I don't know if I can turn up my volume. I have an earpiece. I just pulled my hair away. Maybe that'll help. So thank you so much, Debbie. Really honored to be invited to talk. So I will start. Debbie actually already did a fantastic job introducing me. But I'll just say a little bit more. So I'm a science journalist, and that means I write for magazines and newspapers about all sorts of things, but science is always in there somewhere. And that might be life sciences, biology, medicine, or it could be social sciences like psychology and child development. And it's a really fun job. I freelance, so I write for different publications. And ever since I had my first kid, I have a son who's 9 and a daughter who's 6. I realized I had so many parenting questions and that there weren't always good answers to them that I could easily find online. And I realized when I started looking into the research literature, there was so much research on raising kids and on parenting. And I started writing a column for Slate where I essentially answered my own parenting questions using science and talking to experts. And it was great. It was really fun. And I still do that. I still essentially use science to answer my own questions, to inform my parenting. And I always really enjoy sharing what I've learned with other people. So that's why it's so great to be invited to speak with you today. And so today I want to talk about resilience and about getting through this pandemic. And first, I want to talk a little bit about why this is so hard, because it is for so many reasons so hard, and for many of us it's harder than for others. And I mean, I have many types of privilege, and um, I think I'm suffering a lot less than a lot of other people. But it's still really hard. It's still really hard for me, for other parents, no matter how we're doing and how much privilege we have. And one of the things I think that's so hard about this pandemic for both parents and for kids is that we have really no idea when things are going to go back to normal. We don't know when it's going to end. We see hope on the horizon right now with vaccines, and that's wonderful, but we still don't exactly know, when are our kids going to go back to school? I looked up yesterday, and almost 50% of high school students are still completely remote right now. And the other half aren't necessarily in school very much either. So it's really hard. We don't know when it's going to get back to normal. And it's really hard for kids, and some kids more than others really struggle with that uncertainty and the not being able to answer their questions about, okay, this is when you're going to get to see your friends again. This is when you're going to get to go back to school. And that's a kind of constant uncertainty and fear as well. With everything we do, we're going into a grocery store. We don't really know how safe we are at that moment. We don't know if somebody next to us might have the coronavirus. I was at the eye doctor yesterday with my son, and she had a mask on, but she started coughing. And, I'm like, well, should I be scared right now, or is everything okay? I don't know. It was very just uncertain. And managing that and dealing with that constantly is very, very hard for us, and again, for our kids. The ups and downs too, just you get a glimmer of hope, like the vaccine is here, but then we have these new variants and we don't understand them and what they mean. And all those ups and downs of feeling that hope and then feeling that fear and sadness again, that's really hard to do over and over and over again. And finally, there's lots of reasons, but the last one I'm going to highlight lack of connection. We are not able to see our loved ones in person very much. Friends, our kids aren't able to see their friends. I was just talking to a bunch of teens actually for a story I'm working on about teen mental health during the pandemic, and not getting to see their friends in person, all those little things, like even just huddling over a phone together, or watching a show together, or all the rough housing that boys do, all those little things are really important, and they're missing them terribly. So I realize this is a little bit depressing, but one of the reasons I want to talk about why this is hard is because I think it's really important that we normalize our sadness and our struggles right now. Um, there's a lot of hope on the horizon, and some people are saying, "Oh, the pandemic's over," or "It's almost over," or "We're in the recovery period," and we are getting there. But sometimes when we communicate that things are, over and everything's better, and we're still really struggling, that can be very, very hard for people because they think, "Well, everybody's telling me I'm supposed to feel better, and I don't feel better." And for good reason, you don't feel better. I mean, there's still COVID spreading everywhere. There's a lot of deaths. There's no school, so there are still a lot of reasons to be struggling, and that's okay. And I'm hopefully in this talk going to give you some tools to help you manage those feelings, because they're normal, and so many of us are having them. Um, let's see. Okay, I'm going to go forward. So I did some interviews for a story I wrote for Scientific American all about building resilience during the pandemic, and one thing that one of my sources, Amy Nitza, she's the director of the Institute for Disaster Mental Health at the State University of New York at New Paltz. That's quite a mouthful there. She has worked with survivors of disasters, all kinds of disasters, for her whole career. And she said something that really stuck with me, which was, usually in a disaster situation or crisis situation, you have a distinct group of people who are the survivors who've been affected, who've been traumatized. And then you have a separate group of people who are responding to it and helping. And they come from outside the disaster, and they're not affected by it. But with COVID-19, we are all survivors, and we are all responders in some way. And that is huge. That's a huge burden for us to bear. And it's just a lot for us to be dealing with at once. And that really stuck with me. Um, so that's my daughter there. That was taken this summer. And I just thought it was a great, sort of evocative picture of of resilience, and kids can show so much resilience. So what is resilience though? Because we use this word and we don't always know what exactly it means. And there are different ways of thinking about it. And I've talked to different researchers who study resilience, and they have different ways of framing it, but essentially, one way to think about it is it's the ability to recover from or adjust to misfortune or change. So it's like getting through really tough times. Um, and another way to think about it is as kind of a mindset and an attitude. It's really a belief that even though you can't control everything right now, you can control some things. You do have some control. And it doesn't always feel like it, but if you can find ways of zeroing in on the things that you do have some control over and the things that you can change, that can help you through and essentially lead to resilience. But there are some misconceptions about resilience too, and I just want to correct these. Um, Being resilient doesn't mean that you're never sad, that you're never upset, that you never feel vulnerable or weak. That is not what it's about. In fact, I think embracing those feelings, as I will talk about in a minute, is a big part of resilience. It's important to accept how we feel and think about it, and sometimes express that, and then think through, okay, well, what can I do about those feelings? And it also doesn't mean you're always bouncing back quickly. Um, you can be resilient and you can be struggling for a while, and you can be struggling for a long time, but still end up resilient in the end, and building that resilience the entire way through. um, Another thing that really stuck with me from my interviews, so for this story for Scientific American, I talked to a lot of different researchers and psychologists who work with people who are facing all different kinds of life challenges. So I talked to a lot of rehabilitation psychologists who work with people with disabilities or traumatic brain injuries, um, um, all sorts of just unexpected life challenges. And one of my sources, Mana Ali, she actually works mostly with veterans at the MedStar National Rehabilitation Hospital, and I think it's veterans mostly with traumatic brain injuries. She said she talked about the power of and. So you can feel scared and fearful and angry and resentful, and then also be a victor and be resilient. So it's very important to remind people that they are both, and they are there's not an either or here. We can be all these things and still be resilient. So how do we get there? How do we build resilience? And I'm going to talk about both building resilience yourself and also helping and supporting your kids. Um, so one key thing is not to hide away from your feelings or deny that you're having your feelings. And this can be hard. Sometimes we want to ignore how we feel or push it down and get through the day, and that's okay. But it's important to also take some time to live with your feelings and share them if you can. It can be very actually helpful to talk to kids sometimes about what you're going through. You know, we want to protect our kids and we want to not have them realize that we're vulnerable, but sometimes that's actually very helpful, and it helps them understand that it's okay for them to share their feelings too. um, and as a parent, it's also not our job to rescue kids from feelings. Again, the desire to protect our kids is fierce and we don't want anything bad to happen to them, but they're going to be sad sometimes, maybe a lot of the time. And we don't have to prevent that. We don't have to fix that. We can just help them live with those feelings. And that can be very, very helpful. Um, and recognize them and label them. I I did a lot of research for my book on how talking about emotions helps kids, and there are so many ways. There are some really fascinating studies. Some of them are with younger kids, but one which I will just highlight quickly because I just thought it was so interesting. Researchers invited mothers and their children into a lab and had them read books with the kids, and then they recorded how the parents read the books and whether and how much they paused to talk about feelings, like the characters in the books feelings, or their daughter's feelings as they are listening to the book. And they then, after they did this, and each of the parents was sort of recorded separately with their kids, and it was they wrote down how much they talked about feelings. They then invited those kids and without their parents into a room with a researcher, and the researcher and the child would play, and then the researcher would feign needing something or being uncomfortable, saying, "I'm really cold. Gosh, I wish I had that blanket over there." And they found that the kids whose parents talked about feelings more were much more generous and helpful when interacting with the researchers. And the idea is that the more we talk about feelings with our kids, the more they not only learn to recognize their own feelings, but they learn to understand other people's feelings. And this builds empathy and it helps kids connect with others and be able to say, "Oh, she's cold. If I were cold, I would want that blanket. I'm going to go get that for her." So there's a lot of really, really fascinating research about how just talking about and feeling comfortable with emotions helps kids and helps them just become more generous and empathetic people. Um, and another thing, I'm going to go back to this later too, but it's also really helpful to listen when your kids are trying to open up. Sometimes they come to you at the most inconvenient of times saying, something weird happened at school today or in virtual school today. And it's important, if you can, to try to stop what you're doing and let them connect with you in that moment, because sometimes kids don't always want to connect when we want to connect with them, as I learn every day with my children, but they do sometimes come to me when they're ready, and it's important to try to be there for them in those moments. And to just listen, not necessarily to solve their problems and try to fix them, but to just let them vent and let them talk and be there with them. Um, One of the interesting pieces of research I came across when it comes to accepting and living with feelings is that writing about your feelings can really make a difference. And I just want to talk for a second about one really kind of groundbreaking study from the 1980s. A psychologist, James Pennebaker, he did a kind of clinical trial, except with for social more for social science, in which he split a group of college students up into two groups, and he told the first group, "I'd like you to write about all of your stressful experiences and feelings, whatever you're going through, for 15 minutes a day, 4 days a week." And then he told the other group, just go about life as usual, don't do anything special. And he followed those two groups over time, for the next 6 months, and recorded, how much they had to go to the student health center at their college, and found that the students who engaged in this kind of expressive writing, and this is shocking to me, were half as likely to visit the student health center over the next 6 months. And that's really something. That's a huge result. And it suggests that when we acknowledge and talk about and express our feelings, or I guess just we'll write about our feelings, it helps us work through them in ways that don't just maybe affect our mental health, but affect our physical health too. And that might sound a little bit out there, that our what's going on in our head could affect our bodies, but there's really good science that shows that there's a very strong connection between what's going on up here and what's going on in the rest of our body. So that's something really profound. So just journaling for a few minutes a day might actually help you and your kids quite a bit. Um, so then once you've accepted, okay, I'm struggling right now. The next step is to ask, okay, well, what can I do about that? What can I do about my feelings? What can I do about the problems that I'm facing right now? Um, and so one of the things you might want to do is just sit down and think about what's worrying you most. And there's so much stuff right now that we that's on our plates that we're dealing with. But maybe there's one or two things that are bothering you more than the others. Maybe, I mean, a lot of people have lost jobs recently, and that the financial stress of that is immense. And so that might be something. Gosh, I'm not sure if I can pay my bills. Um, and once you've figured out, okay, this is one of the things that's really bothering me, then you try to sit down and brainstorm, okay, what about this can I control or make some kind of progress on? And obviously, you can't control whether or not you lost your job, but you can think about, well, what can I do this week that will make me feel like I'm making progress towards finding another job? Or maybe it's writing up a new budget, and so that you feel like you're more able to pay your bills and to do what you need to do to survive for now. So really kind of think, brainstorm, and sometimes it involves really thinking outside the box and what you can do. Sometimes the problem might be, I really miss my friends and I don't know how I'm going to see them, and you might have to think outside the box in terms of how you might connect with them, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. But the idea is essentially to think of problems as obstacles that you can at least a little bit overcome, or that you can make progress on, rather than as these insurmountable hurdles that you can do absolutely nothing about. And this is hard sometimes, and I understand that. And sometimes it gets better with practice, but to just sit down and try. And again, be willing to be creative and flexible. Um, sometimes there are solutions that at first in your maybe your life before the pandemic you would never think about doing, but that actually might help you now. And sometimes sitting down and thinking, okay, well, this is not really in my comfort zone, but I'm going to try it and see if it helps. That can be very, very helpful. Um, so what are some of the coping strategies that we know work based on research? I'm going to go through some of the things that can help as you're thinking, as you're brainstorming some possible ways to cope with the problems that you're having or the feelings that you're having. And first, I want to draw attention to a study that was it's a pretty well-known study. It was conducted way back in 2007. It's weird to think how long ago that was now, because it doesn't feel that long ago to me. But 20 international disaster psychologists got together and said, okay, what do we really know are the things that help people the most when they're going through a disaster or a crisis? What are the most important things for them in order to make it through and and build resilience? And they narrowed it down to, and this was looking at the research literature, and so it was entirely evidence-based analysis. And they said, okay, the most important things are for people to feel safe, to feel calm, to feel self-efficacious, so like you can do things that make a difference, to feel socially connected, and to feel hopeful. And so the coping strategies I'm going to talk about next are all aimed at addressing at least one of these things, because these are the most important things. So connection was one of the big things that was highlighted. Connection is so important. there there is research that shows that after 9/11, one of the um, most common things that people did who were who were affected by the disaster was they reached out to loved ones, they met up with loved ones, they connected with the people they loved. And right now, we are in the midst of this disaster in which we cannot connect the way that we need to. So the thing we need the most right now is the thing that we're told we can't do. And so that is exceptionally hard. So we have to think outside the box, and we have to think of ways to connect that don't that don't leave us unsafe, that don't increase the risk that we will get sick or sicken our loved ones. So what can we do? And this is hard because we're so sick of Zoom, I know. But there are ways to use Zoom that can make it a little more fun. So game Zooms, Netflix parties. I don't know much about these, but I was talking to some teenagers this week and they kept talking about Netflix parties. And I think it's like a you watch something with your friends and you can chat and make comments and jokes. So apparently that's something that's getting popular. With game Zooms, there's all sorts of things you can do. You can just play a board game with friends or family members over Zoom. My son loves playing Battleship with his friends because you can play it pretty well over Zoom. Um, and over the holidays, with my parents, I bought them a Scattergories game, and I bought the same Scattergories game for us, and we played Scattergories together. And it just kind of gives you something to be doing so that it's not so awkward. Some of the conversations when you try to talk with your family over Zoom can just be strained and forced, and sometimes having something else there to do just makes it a little bit more fun and a little easier. Um, it's also worth brainstorming what you can do to allow you and your kids to see your friends in person. Obviously, socially distanced, wearing masks, but there are ways to make it work. And I'm sure a lot of you have already thought of ways to make it work. But I've got friends who meet over around a fire pit in their backyard, and they set up the chairs, 10 feet apart, and they don't move from those chairs pretty much at all. But the in-person connection can be very helpful, even and it's hard when we're far apart from each other and we have to wear masks, but it's still sometimes better than just only doing it over Zoom or over the phone. Another way to connect, and this gets at the self-efficacy goal that I mentioned earlier, which is finding ways to help others, finding ways to connect with your community and feel like you're doing something that's proactive and helpful for them. And there are lots of volunteer opportunities online right now. So volunteer match is .org is one website that has a lot of opportunities, and Idealist as well, idealist.org. Those are two good things to check out if you want to perhaps try this. Virtual therapy as well is another great way to make a connection. Um, I I don't know what I would do without my therapist right now. It's just such an important time for me to just talk about whatever I want to talk about, and I feel like we have a great connection. I know it's not for everybody, but if you're willing to give it a try, the good news is there used to be a lot of barriers to teletherapy, and now many of them have been relaxed because of the pandemic. So there are a lot of therapists that are offering virtual sessions. Psychologytoday.com is a good way to search for therapists by location. If you might want to find somebody who is local to you so that you could start out virtual and then maybe get to see them in person one day. Opencounseling.com is another site that I know has some free and low cost options as well. Okay, I'm just checking the time there. I will keep moving along. So another really great coping strategy is to structure your days. And this is hard sometimes, especially if your kids are in virtual school. It kind of feels like every day is the same. But and it doesn't maybe, and especially on the weekends, doesn't feel like there's any structure because you can't leave your house, or you feel like you don't leave your house very much anyway. It still can be very helpful, especially with kids, to weave some predictability into your lives and create things to look forward to, and to create a kind of schedule. My 9-year-old, he wants to know the plan for the day every morning, even on a Saturday when we have absolutely no plans. And we try to give that to him because it gives him a sense of control that I think he really needs right now. So even if we have nothing planned, I'll say, okay, well, let's brainstorm what should we do today? And maybe we'll start by playing Just Dance. We do Just Dance on the Nintendo Switch, as a kind of family activity on the weekend sometimes, and to get some physical activity, which is another thing I'm about to talk about. And then we'll have lunch, and then we'll go on a hike, and then we'll watch a show together. So it can be very helpful to, for certain kids especially, to create some kind of routine or structure in the day. Finding ways to be physically active. Yes, that's very important too. And there's plenty of research showing that when you're physically active, your risk for depression goes down. And that's especially true when you can be physically active outdoors. So it is really cold where I am right now. I'm in New York, and I don't really like being cold, but but I also recognize that being outside, I try to go for walks a couple times a week. They they've really improved my mood, and so to the extent that you can, getting outdoors with your kids. A couple weeks ago, I played um, capture the flag with my kids outside, which I've never done, and we actually had a lot of fun doing that. And everybody was running around, and so again, we kind of had to think outside the box. What can we do outside as a family that's different and fun? And finally, making weekends feel different from weekdays can be helpful. Um, that's hard sometimes when we don't have different schedules on the weekdays and weekends. But to the extent that you can make the weekend feel a little bit special, like maybe you have a little bit different breakfast, or you make sure to go for a hike on Saturday mornings, just something to make the weekend still feel like something separate, and maybe a little extra fun for kids can help, and for you can help. um, Focusing on the present. This is something that rehabilitation psychologists had said to me makes a big difference for their patients when their patients are facing uncertainty about the future. So it's really hard to not know what's tomorrow going to look like. What am I going to be able to do in a month? What am I not going to be able to do in a month? And they said when their patients learn to pay attention to what they're feeling and experiencing in the moment, that can make a big difference. It actually calms your body. Your heart rate can go down because you're not thinking, you're not worried about what's happening in the future. You're just living in the moment. And this is hard. This is really hard because I am a worrier, and I struggle with this. But the research very much shows, I mean, you can refer to this in any number of ways, but a lot of people talk about it as being mindful or practicing mindfulness. There's so much research showing that people who are in crisis situations do better if they can find ways to bring mindfulness into their lives. Um, so there's different ways of doing it. You can do meditations. There are focused breathing exercises, body scans, where you just kind of sit and think about your different body parts going maybe from your head to your toes. I don't know, maybe the direction matters, I'm not sure. And trying to relax and sort of experience the feelings that you're feeling in each part of your body. Even 2 minutes a day can help. I know there's some research that suggests that even just focusing on your breathing or doing a body scan for just a couple of minutes a day can help. And I have noticed this myself. Just doing it for a few minutes in the morning, I feel just more grounded. There are iPhone apps, any kind of smartphone apps that you can use to facilitate these kinds of exercises. Two of them that were recommended to me are Breathe to Relax and Mindfulness Coach. And then if you're not really into the idea of breathing exercises or meditation, you can still be mindful just by focusing on what you're feeling when you're doing things. Maybe it's focusing on your lunch when you're eating your lunch. What does it taste like? What does it feel like in your mouth? And trying to actually be there. Because sometimes I feel like I'm wolfing down my lunches while I'm trying to work at the same time. And I'm done with it. And I realize I didn't even remember eating that. So sometimes it can help to just try to focus on what you're doing and what you're experiencing. Brushing your teeth, one of my sources said she tries to be mindful brushing her teeth and feeling the sensations of brushing her teeth, and that's really neat too. Um, and of course, there's other ways to be mindful. Maybe if you play an instrument or you make art. One of Amy Nitza had said she buys adult coloring books and colors, and that really helps her. And that's helping her just be there in that moment. And so there's lots of different ways to do this. So now I want to talk a little bit about some additional strategies for supporting your kids in particular. Everything I've just said is great for kids too. Mindfulness, um, uh, getting outside, getting physical activity, those are all very important for kids as well. But these next slides are going to just focus a little more on ways to support your kids um, right now. So I think I already alluded to this or mentioned it, but asking how they are and checking in with your kids regularly is something that came up over and over again as I interviewed teens when I was talking to them for the story that I'm working on now. They said, we want to know our parents are there and that they care about how we're doing and that they just ask like how are you doing today and do it a lot and how are you feeling right now. Um, and just showing that you're there. And there may be times they don't want to share or they just say fine, and they I mean with teenagers especially, they may just not answer you, but even if they don't, they still recognize and acknowledge that you did that even if they're not ready to share. And teens say that that means a lot to them. And again, being available when they do come to you, even if it's at, right when you're about to start a work call or you're in the middle of making dinner. Sometimes they come to you at the worst possible times. But to try to just recognize, oh, this is my kid trying to tell me something or trying to open up to me, and trying when you can, and you may not be able to all the time, but trying when you can to stop what you're doing and be there for a few minutes with them, even if it's just sitting with them and letting them vent. Another thing that psychologists said to me for kids, especially older kids and teens, giving them space, independence, and a sense of control is really important right now. The teen years are so important for developing a sense of independence. And it's the time when kids are pulling away from their parents and being pulled towards their peers, but they're stuck at home and they can't do that. So to the degree that we can give them space and independence, that can be very helpful. One of the psychologists I talked to said one of the things she does now is she doesn't nag her kids about how dirty their rooms are. I think she has teens. She says, normally I would it would bother me if their rooms are messy all the time, but now I kind of see their room as like their apartment. It's their space, and I'm giving them the freedom to keep it the way they want it and to just let go of that. Um, so to the degree that you can do that, and maybe offer your kids a kind of sense of control by saying, hey, maybe they like to cook. You say, would you like to cook dinner on Friday nights? Would you like that? And give them this sense of responsibility and control can be helpful. Letting them follow their passions and find new hobbies and engage in things that they enjoy and that gives them a sense of purpose is another thing. And that might involve brainstorming, what could you be doing that would make you happy? My 6-year-old is all she wants to do is make art, and it's wonderful, but it's like our dining room has become the art room, and it's such a mess. I mean, you wouldn't believe what a mess it is all the time, and we clean it up every day, but it's always still a mess. And part of me is like, oh, I hate having this mess here, I know that she gets so much out of being able to do that art every day that I just letting it go. And if your kids do ask for help, of course, problem solve together. But I want to again just emphasize that a lot of teens also said to me, and psychologists as well, that often when kids come to parents with problems, they want to vent, they want to be heard. They don't want their parent to jump in with, well, here's how you fix that, or well, why didn't you do it this way, or maybe you should try this. They don't necessarily want you to jump in with solutions. That can be annoying, and they didn't want that right then. They just want to say that things are hard. And so be careful about how you jump in and when you jump in. If they ask you and it's clear that they want your help, then of course help them and brainstorm with them, but just sort of try to be aware of what they might be needing right then. Do they want solutions, or do they just want to be heard? Um, talk to kids about current events. This is a tricky one. There's been so many things that have happened this year that are awful and that are hard to talk to kids about. But psychologists I talked to said, even so, it's actually very good to engage with kids about what's going on. Again, we want to protect our kids. We don't want to scare them, but a lot of times kids will have heard a little bit from their friends or from overhearing you talking about something that happened in the world or in the community. They might overhear things and get confused or feel anxious about it. And so sometimes actually talking about it with them can make them feel better. And if you don't know where to start, you could start with asking, like, have you heard about this thing that happened? Or have any of your friends mentioned this? And sort of see what they know, and that can help you understand where to go from there, and what kind of context you want to provide. um, and infusing optimism into your conversations with kids is also can be very helpful. So if you're talking about something that's really hard, if you're talking about just the coronavirus, the pandemic, and how hard it is, yes, talk about that and validate their feelings. But when you can and when it seems appropriate, it's also great um, to highlight any silver linings that might exist, or to talk about some of the things, that the hope on the horizon, the fact that, oh, grandma got a vaccine last week and that's fantastic, and now she's protected and we don't have to worry about her so much. And oh, it's really sad that you didn't get to play football this year, but it's kind of cool that you figured out you really love painting, and that's something you may not have discovered otherwise. So thinking of ways to highlight the good parts of this very bad situation can be helpful. Um, and okay, so Debbie mentioned that one of the pieces that she had read of mine, that made her reach out to me, was a piece called "Discipline Looks Different in a Pandemic," and this was a piece I wrote last spring, um, because my kids were struggling, they were acting out more, and I didn't know what to do. And I called up a bunch of child psychologists and said, "What's going on, and what do I do about it?" And it was very helpful what they explained to me. So I just want to pass along the wisdom that they gave me, which is, it's completely understandable that kids are acting out more right now. They're very destabilized. They have less of an emotional reserve. They haven't seen many of their friends for so long. They struggle with the uncertainty. So yes, they're going to act out more. They're going to be in bad moods more. They're going to be struggling. And I know I've said this about 5 times, but acknowledging their feelings and validating, recognize that even though, they had maybe a behavior that was not acceptable, they had valid feelings underlying that behavior. And it's important to acknowledge those, and keep them kind of separate from whatever they did. Um, then once you've had a chance to validate their feelings, and it may be that you want to wait till they've calmed down and you've calmed down, at some point you do want to address why that behavior wasn't acceptable. So, maybe your kid was really upset. Well, I'll give you an example with my daughter the other day. She was very upset because she found a snow pile and her friends jumped in it before she could, and she got very, very upset about that. And then she ended up, I think, kicking her teacher. So she came home from school, we heard what happened, and she was still extremely upset about it. And so I knew it wasn't the time to correct her at that exact moment. So I talked to her about, oh gosh, so you must have been really frustrated. You wanted to play in that snow pile, and by the time you had a turn, it was all gone because everybody had jumped in it and flattened it. And that must have been frustrating. And then later on, when she was calmer, I talked about, okay, well, I know you were upset, but you know what? Kicking your teacher is not okay, and hurting other people, and being violent in your anger is not okay. And what could you have done differently? And then talk to your kids about what they can do to remedy the situation. So I said, well, do you want to apologize to her tomorrow at school, or write her an apology letter? And she wanted to write a letter, so she wrote a letter, um, and to try to sort of yeah, make amends if they need to. And punishments are tricky right now because kids are struggling so much. The psychologist I talked to said it might make sense to ease up on punishments. Certainly, you want to have limits and you want to discuss them and you want to talk about what's not okay for your kid to do and why it's not okay. But punishments you may want to ease up on for while you know that your kid is struggling, because those don't necessarily, those can sort of lead to this vicious cycle of anger and resentment and feeling misunderstood. And it really depends on your situation and what you feel comfortable with, but this was the general broad advice that I had gotten from child psychologists. Um, let's see. Okay, I want to just talk a little bit about how to tell the difference between just normal, understandable sadness during this pandemic and signs of depression, because it can be hard to tell the difference, especially, we're all struggling right now. So how do we know when it's struggling to the point of maybe needing professional help? So researchers I talked to about this said if you're seeing changes in appetite or sleep patterns in either yourself, your spouse, or your kids that last more than a week, your kids are eating a lot more or a lot less, or they're sleeping a lot more or a lot less, that can be a sign of depression. Increased irritability, well, who isn't more irritable right now? But um, increased irritability that's pronounced and that lasts is another sign to look for. Having trouble concentrating, again, we're all probably having trouble concentrating, but if you notice that you or your kids are really struggling with this a lot more than usual, that's another sign. um, a big one being unable to enjoy the things you used to enjoy. If you see that your kids don't want to talk to their friends anymore, they don't want to play basketball outside like they usually do, and that's something that they've always loved, and they're saying they don't want to do anything, that can be another sign. um, Pain, dizziness, or indigestion. So interestingly, I talked about the connection between the brain and the body a little bit already, but one of the ways that depression and anxiety can manifest is through the rest of our body, and we might have increased symptoms of, yeah, headaches, other kinds of pain, indigestion. I mean, I remember, election week, my digestive system was a disaster, and I know it was just from the stress of everything. So, keep an eye out. Obviously, there can be many causes for indigestion that do not include depression or anxiety disorder, but it's something to just keep in mind. You might want to talk to a doctor and rule out other causes, but it can be a sign of depression. And one other important thing is, as I mentioned, we're all irritable sometimes, but the difference between sadness and depression, Harold Koplowitz, who is a psychiatrist who runs the Child Mind Institute in New York City, he said, depression persists. It's about duration. If something lasts more than 2 weeks and it's occurring every day, that's a red flag. And so if you are concerned about yourself, your spouse, your child, what do you do? So psychologists said there's a handful of things you can do. One is to reach out to your pediatrician if this is your child that we're talking about, and ask for a referral, or just ask, tell them what's happening and ask, do you think that some more help? That can be very helpful. Or your primary care provider, if this is you that you're talking about, your primary care provider can provide referrals, and just help. You can also reach out to local mental health clinics, hospitals, academic medical centers. Sometimes they will actually triage kids virtually. I know the Child Mind Institute is offering um, like a one-on-one triage with child psychologists if you're worried about your kid. I think it's $150 to do that. Um, but other mental health clinics might do that for free and be able to give you advice. You can connect with faith-based organizations or other community organizations in your area that might be involved in, supporting youth or supporting mental health. And again, finding a therapist online if that's something you want to try. Psychology Today and Open Counseling. There's a lot of sites now that are out there, and I think, I don't know which ones are better than others, but I do know that Psychology Today and Open Counseling are both pretty well recommended. Um, let's see. Okay, just to go back to resilience one more time. So resilience comes from finding the coping strategies that work for you or for your child. And there's no right answer. There's no one size fits all. Some of these strategies that I've talked about, and I talked about a lot, and you don't have to do all of these. I hope I did not imply that you have to do all of this right now in order to feel better. That is certainly not the case. But if there's some things that I mentioned that you think, okay, this might help, let me try it, then try it. And if it doesn't help and you don't like it, then you say, okay, I tried it, and you try something else. So it's okay. Not all of these things are going to work for you. Um, but when you do find something, or you find a few strategies that help, then the more that we can identify and recognize as helpful coping strategies for us, the more resilient we will become, because then we will have these coping strategies in the future whenever we are faced with new challenges and new traumas. So that's really what resilience is about. Um, yeah, this is a great quote that I got. Charles Figley runs the Traumatology Institute at Tulane, and he has worked in all sorts of disaster situations, supporting people. Um, and he said to me, "People are stronger than they think. I frequently find people are unbelievably resilient." And so I thought that was really nice. I referred to a few articles today, or yeah, some of the stuff I said was pulled from articles I've written. I also want to recommend an article. Phyllis, you know what? I actually don't know how to pronounce her last name. Is it Fagel?
It's Fagel, Phyllis
Fagel,
Fagel.
thank you, thank you. She's wonderful. She's a middle school counselor and author. She just, I think, yesterday or the day before, wrote a piece for the Washington Post, 7 Ways to Build a Child's Resilience During the Pandemic and Long After It Ends. It's a great read. There's some things I said today that echo what's in there. The piece I wrote for Scientific American is here. I think these slides will all be available, and the recording is available. So you can come back to this. Discipline looks different in a pandemic, and 4 ways to help if your kid is depressed was another piece that I pulled from today. So those, if you want to read more, those are just some articles that might be helpful. Just plug my book. I have a book coming out in July. Some of what I said today is actually covered in the book. I talk a lot about essentially what the science says about shaping values and character in kids, and what we can do to support them in ways so that they can thrive. I have a parenting newsletter that I just recently launched, and there's the link to it. It's free, and what I'm doing is I'm addressing parent questions. So the name of the newsletter is my kid the asshole? Sorry again for the swearing there. And the idea is, I do not think that kids are assholes, by the way. I think sometimes they have challenge, their behavior can be challenging, but there's a lot we can do just by trying to understand that behavior, where it's coming from, can help so much. So what I'm trying to do with the newsletter is, parents will ask questions. I encourage you to submit a question about your own child's behavior. If it feels challenging or obnoxious, say, why does my kid do this thing? And my last one was, why do my kids turn into demons after they use screens? What's going on there? And then I answer it using science. What's going on? Why are your kids having trouble in these situations? And then what can you do about it? So that's what I'm hoping to do with the newsletter. So I would love if you would subscribe, if you enjoyed this talk and you want more parenting advice that's based on science. Yeah, and so that's it. I'd love to, if there's any questions.
Well,
I
there
realize,
has been a lot of chat that, oh, can you hear?
yes,
Can you hear me?
I
Okay.
can hear you.
There's been a lot of chat on the chat, and it's been really obviously inspirational. So many people are sharing really incredible ideas, and there was a suggestion that I take all of those ideas and share them, which I will. I've started to do that, but there was some really great. If you haven't visited the chat, and I will send this out, but there's some really great ideas. Everyone started talking about things like audiobooks and different ways they're getting their meditation. They said jackbox.tv has been a wonderful distraction. That might be like your Netflix parties, and how they place categories and walking and hiking. And the reminder of to model self-expression and sharing negative and positive feelings, which is so important. A lot of discussion about sharing feelings. And, thank you so much, Dion, for sharing the fact that, your mother really made time for you to share your feelings. And, she specifically said, if you don't mind, Dion, she specifically said that I was shy, smart, and the only Black child in my entire grade. Checking in every day and having her really listen meant she heard about the problems, including racism, immediately. And Kelly seemed to also have shared experience with that. And so I think it's great to have this kind of community really be sparked by the advice and words that you gave to us, Melinda. So we really appreciate that. And I think one thing we learned over a lot of these webinars is the fact that, making the time and listening to our kids is something that's really critical. And one thing we always say about validation is, as you were saying, Melinda, that it's not that their emotions in your mind have to be warranted, but the question is are their emotions true to them? Are they truly feeling those emotions? And that's the validation piece that that I think is so important. And my daughter said to me the other day, I really love you as a mom because you just don't react to the things I say, which I think obviously was a compliment, because I think the point was that, she really appreciated, and I know all of our kids really appreciate the fact that we listen. And we're trying we have to try really hard as trained, right, not to bring our own emotions to the table. So and all the comments have been great. And I know that Melinda's website cannot be reached today, which is really unfortunate. She's actually moving over to a new website that's going to support her book and all of the work that she's done. So just be patient. I think it'll be back up soon, tomorrow.
Yeah, they said 20. It's so funny. It went down at 11 p.m. last night, and she said, "Oh, it should be down for 24 to 48 hours." I was like, "Oh my goodness, what timing!" Yes, I'm
Yes,
sorry.
of course. So yes, the session is recorded, and there's a lot of great comments. So fortunate to have access. Thank you, Kelly. Extremely helpful. Thank you very much. And I will share, as I mentioned, we're still trying to nail the date down, but we are having an expert come and speak to us on raising teens. She actually works exclusively with teens. So if you do have a teen, please keep your eye out for that. I will send the recording out in moments as soon as I gather up all of the chats, and we're able to post that. And that will soon be on our events page, linked to our events page, but I'll also send that out in the Eventbrite to everybody who registered, which is all the people on here. So I don't know if we have any specific questions more than the comments. And I'll just close with the fact that one of the keyword I love that you had was strategies. And strategies and resilience are really cool, because the whole concept, because if we can say we have strategies, that means it's repeatable. And things that are resilience are the idea that I can manage things on my own, and we have to use strategies to do that. So all of the things that you guys shared are very educated audience here. These are all strategies, even if they're things like playing a game or using mindfulness or walking out and, walking outside, or bundling up if it's cold, and even as parents, strategies to kind of just sit back and listen. And I know for me, being reminded of these every single month in different ways have been really, really valuable for me, because we all get caught through. We all get caught up in our own fears and emotions, and so it's really nice. Thank you all, everybody, and especially thank you so much, Melinda. We're all very excited for your upcoming book, and we congratulate you on all of your success and your upcoming class. And we really appreciate everything you've done for our community. So thank you all for attending. We really are grateful, and we will send all of these things out as soon as we possibly can. And we'll see you hopefully next month, where even more people will be vaccinated. We'll leave on a high note, right? All right, well, have a great day, everybody.